Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to begin. To welcome speakers, special guests, and audience to the third in the Veteran Employees Resources Group Lecture Series. Health issues facing veterans. Today's installment will be a panel discussion addressing some of the issues faced by female veterans in and out of the military. According to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, there are more than 2 million women veterans in the United States and Puerto Rico. That means women make up 9.4% of the total veteran population. By 2040, the VA expects that percentage to almost double. While many veterans often find it difficult to transition to civilian life, women veterans face challenges their male counterparts don't experience. We are grateful to each speaker who volunteered to participate and share their stories with us today. For those in the audience, you might have noticed programs at the front and at the back. Please take one as it contains more detailed information on our panel and their contributions to our freedoms today. At this time, I would like to introduce our panel from left to right. Xenia Campos is with NYU Langone, Brooklyn, and is a member of the Emergency Management and Enterprise Resilience team. Sydney Covington recently graduated from the Silver School of Social Work at New York University. She received the Student Veteran of the Year Award and is currently serving as event chair of the NYU Military Alliance. Maki Thomas Livesey is a graduate scholar at NYU Steinhardt, engaged in food history, culture, museum studies, and global connections. Emily Harris is a construction site fire safety manager with Turner Construction Company and a fellow Blue and Gold officer for the Naval Academy Admissions Office. Deidre Rice-Reese is the assistant vice president of residential treatment at Samaritan Daytop Village and currently serves as the chair of the Committee on Cultural Competency for the New York State Association of Substance Abuse Providers. We also have a special guest in the audience, Mr. Jim Markson from the VFW, a United States Air Force Vietnam veteran who will provide more details on the VFW and its benefits for female veterans following the Q&A after our panel ends their last contribution. Without further ado, our first speaker will begin on the topic, transition from military operations in the civilian world. Xenia?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. So I'm not going to use the mic because Marines don't use microphones. But I do want to start off by saying thank you to everyone who took the time out to come join us. And this is a really important panel, not only to support the veterans, but to support the smallest population of our military, and that's the women that raise their hand and choose to serve. So before I begin my topic, I'd like to start off with a little quote to kind of start us off in what I want to talk about. So the quote goes, "The Marine Corps has no ambition beyond the performance of its duty to its country." So if you take a step back and think about what that means, it means that my only objective during my time serving was this country and my Marines. Everything I did was to be a better leader, be a mentor, and be proficient within my MOS so that I could earn the trust and confidence of the Marines, so that they knew that if there were ever a time that we had to go into battle, they could trust me. I don't think people understand that these Marines are willing to give their lives for you. And that's a huge price to ask for a 17 or 18-year-old. And if that's something you're going to ask them, you better be damn sure that you're good enough to be able to reciprocate that. I've been very grateful in my career that I feel like I've had a place and I've had that connection with the Marines that I've had the pleasure of serving with. But then there comes a time when it has to end. And, in the services, there's a manual for everything. There's a manual that teaches you how to tie your boots. There's a manual that tells you how to eat. There is a manual that tells you how to screw a screw. into a panel. And unfortunately, in the civilian world, there isn't a manual for how you do that. So you're indoctrinated into the system with the manual, and then when you're done, there's no book. And for a lot of Marines, they don't know how to ask for help. So when you get out into the scary world, you figure it out, and a lot of Marines get lost. So for me, coming out when I decided to go the reserve side, I was fortunate enough that I was a late in life Marine. I commissioned when I was 29, so I had to get an age waiver. So before that, I had some life experience, but I still had that feeling of being lost when I got out, because I didn't know what my purpose was in the civilian world, right? I knew what my Marines were doing from the time they got up to the time they went to bed. I knew what their families were doing from the time they got up and they went to bed. And they were my world, they were my purpose. But when you step outside the uniform, that purpose isn't clearly defined. So you struggle a little bit to really find who you are. You struggle a little bit to assimilate into civilian population because you guys speak differently than we do. And then you get into the workforce. And then you're surrounded by people who do things on their own time, which is not how we operate. I've been really lucky that my team is here to support me, and it's one of those things where, you know, my boss tells me to do something, and I stop what I'm doing, and whatever he needs to get done, it gets done. I learned the hard way that that's not how it works in the real world. And you know, as Marines and as leaders, and you know, as enlisted and as officers, you know, the thing you do is you correct it, and you correct that by, you know, some choice, colorful words. And I learned very quickly that that's not how it works in the civilian world, right? You can get in trouble for that. You can get fired. So you don't know what to do. So I think in my journey, every job that I've had, it's been a continual learning process on how to be a normal person. It's really hard. And I guess another example is I just got back from AT. I've been gone for 2 weeks. We have a deployment and a workup that we had to get some Marines prepared for. And, you know, I rolled back into it, 043, I'm up. I'm out in formation before my Marines so that they see that their leader's out there. We work, and I'm the last one to go to bed. People screw up, you correct them, you know, and ma'am, good to go, ma'am, it's gonna happen, I trust it. And then I come back here, right? And not just here at NYU, I come back, you know, just hopping on the train and hopping on the bus, and you just get infuriated by, you know, people not having their shirts tucked in, right? It is, you know, people not saying good morning, and just people not being ready for their day. And for anyone in the military, that kind of drives you crazy. So I've had to learn how to recalibrate, and I'll admit there are still times where it just gets very frustrating for me. And there are times where, you know, I have suffered from bouts of depression because I just felt lost. But I think the good thing about the Corps and the good thing about especially working for a place like here is that the support system is amazing. Not only with the Veterans Association, but with my department, with my peers, and with my buddies back in the rear. You know, everyone's a phone call away. You pick up the phone and say, hey man, I had a really tough day today. I'm not sure how to handle this. And you guys talk about it. And it's something we don't do. And I think if there's anything that I'd like to pass down to you, is if you guys have veterans within your respective departments, is to just, you know, talk to them, see how they're doing, ask them how their day was. You know, find out if there's anything that's bothering them. Find out if there's anything that you could do to kind of help them get through their day. If they're doing any activities that are military related, ask them if you can tag along, just so that you have an idea and an understanding of our world, because they're very different. Mm-hmm. But I think I'll get off my soapbox now. You guys heard me flapping my gums enough. So again, I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for supporting us. Thank you for being a safe space for veterans. Thank you for giving us a voice and a platform. Thank you for helping us integrate into your world. And Semper Fi. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to use the microphone. I guess I'm not Marine enough. No, I'm kidding. I'm an Army veteran. I'm Sydney Covington, as she said. I served in the U.S. Army as a medic. I got out in 2014 because in 2013 the government shut down, preventing me from re-enlisting. And so my mentor encouraged me to go back to school, and so that's when I dropped the packet for early separation to further my education. I'm going to talk about stereotypes in the military for women and, well, female veterans, and then also in the civilian sector. Something I think is there are some similarities in the civilian world and in the military world when it comes to having females or women in places that are predominantly male. They don't think we can perform. Oftentimes our promotions is debated, who does she sleep with to get to where she's at? We are also sometimes looked as if we are incapable of doing things. What I thought was crazy was when they talk about putting women in combat jobs. I hate to break it to everyone, women have already been in combat, if you didn't know that. It's crazy because it's like just because you don't have a combat job does not mean you don't get to witness combat. War doesn't care what gender you are, what age you are. Children are dying in war, and so women are also dying. Women are also seeing combat. Women are also having to shoot back, and so oftentimes as a woman veteran and hearing male veterans or service members degrade women's service, it was like very frustrating because it's like just like you, I have to be able to shoot a gun just like to be able to survive, and I have to be willing to kill for you just like you should be willing to kill for me. And I think in the military, that's something that still needs to be worked on because in the Army, our training is together. And even though male service members sees us doing the same things they're doing, they still degrade us because our PT scores are different, which in reality, PT doesn't determine how you're going to perform in war. It's just a true reality. Like, it can give an assessment on your ability to maintain endurance, but no one knows what you're going to do when you're getting shot at. It's really, really different. And so assessing my ability to be able to react in war based off my PT score, I always found very confusing and not realistic, because there are people who can score 300 and then getting shot at, they may not even be able to shoot a gun because they're too scared. So assessing women based off of that, I always thought was crazy. Something I think when transitioning out of the military as a female veteran, which always still to this day annoys me, is when I walk into spaces for veterans and they're like, so are you the spouse or the dependent? And it's like, actually, no, I'm the veteran. Why do you assume that just because I'm a woman that I cannot have been the person who served? Why is it that to you, the only people who do serve are male veterans? Like, I know at the VA, oftentimes when I go, which I think is crazy because I've looked at military medical forms and your name is right next to your sex, and I get called Mr. Covington first. And then when they see me, they go, oh, I'm sorry, Miss Covington. And I'm like, and it's just one of those things where it's like, it doesn't matter how many times I go back, they will always default and call me Mr. And I've had male veterans try to justify it like, well, the majority of the force is male. And it's like, yeah, but my sex is right next to my name, so I don't understand why we're having this confusion on what gender I am. And then another thing is that like civilians feel as though they're entitled to women's veterans trauma. Like, I know when I go into spaces where there's questions, it's like, well, have you experienced military sexual trauma? Why is that a question, and why do you think that's okay? One in 4 women in the world experience sexual trauma. Do you go up to every fourth woman you interact with and ask them, have they experienced sexual assault? And I don't know why it happens to women veterans. Like, why is that an okay question? It even happens with, like, if you tell someone you've been to war and they're like, so have you killed someone? Like, why is that an okay question? That is trauma. And I don't feel like you have the right to have access to my trauma unless you're my therapist. And even then, I should be willing to disclose that when I'm ready, and you shouldn't be forcing me to do that. And so I feel like that's kind of one of the hugest like battles I have. And then also being a woman veteran, like people will tell me, civilians will tell me, well, you didn't really experience war. Well, how would you know? Were you there with me? Like I'm really confused. Like I could have sworn you were not next to me when I was in Afghanistan. So I find it very, like, something that has to change is this talk about women in combat, because just because we weren't in combat jobs does not mean we don't experience combat. There are women who have died downrange. There are women who have lost limbs, who are walking limbless because of their experiences in war. And we have to be able to acknowledge that and honor their service just as well as we honor male service. Because I just know when one of my male veteran friends talk about their service is not degraded like women veteran services. Like, I know my service is always degraded just because I'm a female, which doesn't make sense. I didn't get to pick the sex I was born as. So I serve just as much as they did. Yes.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Debbie, and the veterans group here at NYU Langone for letting us speak and be part of the panel. I'm going to share my transition story, and I am actually going to refer to my notes, not because I'm going to read it to you, but just because there's a couple of points that I wanted to make sure that I hit. And it's been a little while since I got out last summer, so I've kind of sort of become half civilian, half military at this point. Retired last year as a Air Force officer, and here's my personal transition story. So, unlike some of the people here on the panel, I'm a little bit different because I did retire from the military, so some of the things that I've experienced might be different than their experiences that they've lived through. I elected a different path. I chose to come to graduate school. A lot of my friends chose to go back in as a contractor or as a civilian with the federal government or different levels of government. So I'm kind of the person who chose the path less traveled. So I actually attend graduate school here at NYU. I study food studies, which is not something that most military veterans tend to choose as a topic of study. The reason I got into that is because I am a huge semi-professional cocktail enthusiast, and since they did not offer a master's degree in spirits and liquor, food was the next closest thing. So I actually study it. That's actually what I would like to get a career in. However, based on my experiences, I've actually shifted that a little bit more towards the museum studies side of the house. And that's where I'm kind of leading towards as I try to figure out what to do with my looming graduation next summer. Transition-wise, I moved actually from the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. to Manhattan last summer, which was quite the change. But the bigger change, not the physical change, is actually being a senior management officer in the Pentagon to just being a student here at NYU, and my classmates are literally half my age. So despite the fact that I know how to use my iPhone, I've got a LinkedIn profile, I can do Instagram, I can do stories, I'm not the target demographic for the student population. I'm an older, non-traditional student. I'm not the 20 or 30-year-old person that typically comes into our program, so that's a little bit different. Also, while you're in the military bubble, society has changed quite a bit. I know you've seen the news that the military tends to be at the forefront of social change, but I had no idea until I came back into the civilian world that there were such things as pronouns. Like, I didn't understand that that was not a concept that I was exposed to in the military. And so the first week I was here at NYU, someone kindly actually shared a little video and explained, hey, this is how it is in the real world. So those little things made me realize how much of a difference there had been in the 20 years that I served in the military. The other thing that I was not very good at, and this is more on the academic side, is I can read a 3,000-page joint operations manual, and I can write a bullet paper to the secretary's staff and say, boom, 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 this is what it means. Academic paper and academic writing, totally different, and I've lost my ability since I was an undergrad to be able to do that well, and sometimes I feel like because of my age, my professors expect me to be this eloquent writer, which I am no longer, so that's been a little bit of a struggle as a student. Other than that, I've been pretty surprised by the student body here. When I went to undergrad many, many years ago, 30 years ago, students were very formal with their professors. Now it's very casual. Professors are called by their first names. Schedules are sort of advisory. People come in and out to classes whenever, and it's very different. I can identify with the last two speakers of missing that structure, and I expected the same in the academic setting, and so it's been a little bit of an adjustment there. Now, on the military side, I've gone through the standard fun of the transition assistance program that they make you go through. It's a week-long program where they teach you how to write a resume, how to dress, different programs that are available to you as a veteran. I did find, though, that most of those programs are for 20 and 30-year-old veterans, not necessarily retirees. And unfortunately, a few of the programs are pretty much checking the blocks just to say, hey, we offered this, it looked good on paper, but really didn't offer any value added for that transitioning veteran. So coming back into the real world, I was not as prepared as I thought I was, even though financially I think I was pretty disciplined in that regard and did well, even despite moving to New York in my tiny little studio apartment. I'm fine on that front. But the other half of it that's been frustrating, and I think that's what both of you have echoed, I've experienced similar things to that as well, and that is kind of the loss of sense of purpose. And what I mean by that is when you're in the military, you're used to being on 24/7. People can call you, they expect you to reply, they expect you to take care of things at all hours in the day and night. When you retire, no one calls you. The squadron's happy without you. Nobody from the office reaches out to you. You are all of a sudden not really necessary. And that's a very weird feeling to be in when you're used to being on 24/7 for many, many years. Now, this is not a pity party. This is not something that I look at from a deficiency perspective, and that's something that I would ask that people try not to do when you find out somebody is a veteran. I obviously chose to serve, and I'm honored to have served, and I'm also very grateful for all of the benefits that I've received as a retiree and as a veteran. So for that, I thank everybody for recognizing that. So the second half of what I want to talk about is the interaction between the civilian and military world, and that has to do with connections and communications. Connections-wise, your family is your biggest connection point for everybody, not just the military. But I've got my personal side, which includes my sister, which I think you've seen a picture of my twin sister up there. She also served in the military in the United States Army. Her and her husband are both retired as well. My father also retired from the military. He served in the United States Navy in World War II and Korean War. My mother was not a Marine. She did not serve, but she actually gave up her country. She was Japanese, and she became a naturalized citizen here of the United States just to make sure that my sister and me had the best opportunities we can have. So in that sense, I think our whole family served. But I also served with the people who I went to school with, who I went to training with, the people who mentored me, who supported me. Those are the people who I considered my military connection, my military family, and I appreciated all of them for that. What's different now that you get out of the military, though, is that there are things that you bring with you because we move a lot in the military. So you remember things like the piles of snow in Wyoming or the 70-mile-an-hour winds or the call to prayer when you were deployed in Turkey or Saudi Arabia. But each place that you go to, whether it's the military or civilian side, it takes a little bit of getting used to. It takes a little bit of adjustment to figure that place out. But I've figured out some things that's been helpful to me. Mostly with the outdoors, hiking, backpacking, snowshoeing, camping. Those things have been great to help that transition. What I needed to do more, though, was to communicate with others, and that's been a little bit more of a challenge. In the military, we know that communication is paramount. We have to do that because our lives depend on it. I actually used to fly the flight suit picture in an airplane that had a radar on it called the AWACS, and it was a communications platform, basically. So I knew how important that is. Also, as a squadron commander, I know how important it is to reach out to people and make sure they're doing all right. How are you doing? Make sure that you and your family are taken care of. But on the civilian side, it's much different. On the civilian side, I would say that you have to be very persistent. You have to know the right people. More importantly, you have to be able to sell something or at least give the impression that you have something to bring to the table. And that's a little bit different than the military, where they expect that you can do X, Y, and Z, and there's no questioning or not as much proving of what it is that you bring to the table because you wear it every day on your uniform. You have your ribbons, you have your name, your rank, and everybody expects something based on that. So it is a little bit different. The other thing that I figured out in the civilian world that does not happen in the military is ghosting. That's a thing, apparently, which I did not know anything about, that people just inexplicably just stop talking to you. And that's obviously not something that happens in the military, so that's been a little bit of an interesting challenge, both from a job side and also from the dating side, so that's been kind of not as much fun. But anyway, so communications is a challenge for me, and I'm working on that. But I wanted to point out, as I've told you my story, the fact that I'm a female and a woman veteran of color isn't central to my narrative. And I wanted to point that out for a reason. My being an Air Force veteran, a former Air Force officer, is more forward to me as a part of my identity than something that I live with every day, but that I don't necessarily feel compelled to talk about. We can already acknowledge that without my saying anything. But the veteran part, I think, is the important part in this conversation. The other thing I do want to point out is that in the civilian world, I guess I'm not the target demographic as I referred to earlier. I'm actually 50 years old. Most people kind of go, oh, really, you're 50? And then they try to do the math of how many years I've been in the military. But that's important, and that's the relevant part that I wanted to leave you all with, because that's the part that I think people forget. As a military retiree, I'm not the target demographic of 20 and 30-year-old veterans who've served but still have many, many more years of work life left. And I found that my experience so far has been that challenge of saying that I'm not yet invisible, of saying that I still have value to offer to prospective employers, of saying that that I'm not as visible, and people kind of tend to tune out older women. So that's what I ask of the group, is to just be mindful of the fact that some of us might not be as young as some of the other veterans you might know, but that we do have the same need to belong and the same vulnerabilities that the other veterans share and support. So that's kind of my transition story. I don't think it'll ever end, obviously, because we're all transitioning constantly in our own lives. But I do want to make sure that I connect with people. I do want to make sure that I continue to communicate with people and to be my true, authentic, and loyal self. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So it is now 2019, and I got out in 2005, so I'm going to use the mic too. Is it working? Testing. I was a Marine Combat Engineer Officer, but I do understand exactly what Zania is saying. I can project, just not going to try that hard today. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about reality of available benefits and resources in and out of the military. And what's really interesting is that I think we did hit on this, is not knowing how to ask for help. I got into the Naval Academy in 1991, and I was 17, and before I knew it, my dad was just saying, okay, don't talk about sex, politics, or religion. And then there I was in Annapolis, and I was into plebe summer. So I didn't know I was gay until my sophomore year, which is youngster year. And then I realized I probably lied on the entrance Scantron, or whatever you want to call it, because they actually do ask you that. And I was like, what's that? And I just said no. So for me, going through the rest of the Naval Academy was like, hi, I'm Emily Harris, and oh no, excuse me, I'm gay, but here's my closet, I'm going to go into it now, you know. And so as I realized that this is something I could get kicked out for, I sort of stopped asking for help on things. It's like, I got to figure this out myself. So for me, I don't have a good explanation for you except for what I just looked up. Okay, so when I got out in 2005, so I did 10 years in the Marine Corps, through the Naval Academy, through the basic school in Quantico, I had to be careful, yet still try to be myself. And so I got into a little trouble here and there. So that's probably why I didn't get to continue to 20 years. So I'm sometimes envious that people are still in and that things have changed. But when I look back, I'm like, I'm not so sure I want to get back in, just because I don't really trust it, type thing. So has it really changed that much? Which I hope it has. So one of the things that, as I was transitioning in 2005, that I didn't know I could take advantage of, which I think is excellent that you're in your graduate education now, is that I could take advantage of the GI Bill. So right around Valentine's Day in 2017, I was meeting with a fellow Blue and Gold officer, Marty Kwan, and she said, how do you like your job? And for those of you, well, you already know what my bio is. I work for Turner, okay? But there's some frustrating things about being a safety manager in construction when you're trying to deal with grown men all the time that don't want to put on their safety glasses, don't want to discuss how to do the activity and make it safe. So that can be troubling. And then the superintendent doesn't want me to get involved because that might slow down the workers from getting their work done. And then if I approach the workers doesn't want me to have anything to do with it because I might get them kicked off the job site. So there's always this, like, I'm in the middle and nobody wants to deal with me. So the point I'm trying to make, let me just take 1 second here, get back on track. Sorry about that. Yes. So for me, meeting with Marty Kwan that evening, I was probably venting a little. And she said, well, why don't you start your own company? And I said, oh, I haven't thought about that. Why don't you have your master's? I can't afford it. And she's like, really? Why haven't you done GI Bill? So that's my point. So all of a sudden, I had this understanding that even though I went to the Naval Academy, I could still take advantage of the GI Bill. I thought I had already used it up by going to the Naval Academy because that was such a tremendous opportunity. So I got on the ball very quickly, decided that emergency management would be excellent, and I think that would be something you might like as well at Georgetown. And in 12 months, here I am, I just graduated, and hopefully I can transition Turner Construction into a department that involves strictly resilience and looks at sustainment, but resilience as well. And maybe we can bring in our clients like NYU, because I already can see that NYU is doing things that are more resilient in the first place. So the GI Bill is a really big one that I wanted to try to make sure that if you have veterans in your organization, that you're encouraging them to take advantage of it. The other thing I wanted to point out is that as I've spoken with close friends and loved ones about this particular topic that I was going to speak on today, current funding right now is for post 9/11 veterans. So this means that a large veteran population is on the sidelines, and we need to make sure that that doesn't continue. Okay, so one way to respond, and what Turner is doing, is that companies like Turner, we have veterans programs in our companies. And the whole idea is that we're recognizing that we already have veterans in our midst. When I first applied to Turner Construction, being a veteran wasn't a really big part of, why I was being hired. They just were like, oh, okay, you know how to manage a lot of Marines, carpenters, electricians, things like that. You'd be great as a construction manager type person. So, but it wasn't really celebrated. So as I got into Turner Construction, and just in the past 3 years, we now have a veterans network group, and we're trying to retain the veterans so that they don't get up and go when they find the next opportunity, like rotating duty stations, because that's kind of what we do, right? We rotate. So the other things I wanted to point out, am I doing okay on time? Great. Okay. So there's a lot of programs. I just looked these up, okay? Because as I said, I'm just now learning how to ask for help myself. But there's some really interesting things out here. The RAND Corporation has done a lot of research on assessing post-deployment and health-related needs associated with PTSD, major depression, and TBI. I did a run last year at the Intrepid, and I learned a lot about traumatic brain injury. So that was really interesting. And there's a lot of, civilians are affected by that because we come home and we don't realize something's wrong until something really big happens. So that's really important that we begin to understand better, and so does our network, people at work that we spend a lot of time with, as well as family. There's also programs there's a program here, NYU Family Clinic, okay? So I think that's great because if you go online and you check out the video, there's a young captain in the Marine Corps that's discussing how as he's become an attorney, and he's started to realize symptoms, didn't really realize where it was coming from, but he found a lot of good support here. Individualized counseling, which I'd like to add is incredibly important. I've been in group therapy. I know what Al-Anon is. And I think that sometimes when certain people bring certain things to group therapy, it can be traumatic to someone else in the group. And so I think that though everyone needs care, sometimes in the group, it can be a little intimidating. So I'll continue. The Get Headstrong is also a way for us to get more assistance. And at times, I think that's actually free to the veteran, which is excellent. Also, Give an Hour is focusing on identifying at-risk populations and making sure to deliver services through a network of volunteer professionals. So, for example, if you are now a social worker and you can volunteer, you would get into a very structured, healthy environment in order to help veterans and also their networks, is what I understand. And then you also have Team Red, White, and Blue, which what they're trying to do is to connect civilians with veterans. And so you might go for a sporting event, you might go for a run, and that's a great time, even if it's a walk, whatever it is, that's a really great time to get a lot of understanding. Because I know I love exercising with people. So it's just, I think that's part of when you first get in your squad or your fire team that's like your family. So that really works. There's one or two more things I wanted to add. There's another program that is called Combat Paper. And I remember when I was getting out, I didn't necessarily want to get out, had to get out. So what did I do with all my uniforms? It was very psychologically, it might have been cathartic, but I was still not happy. I took them all. I was in probably Centerville, Virginia. Took them all to Quantico, the thrift store, every single one. Very expensive, package that I dropped off at the thrift store in Quantico. And I basically said, I hope there's a female Marine that can fit into these, because these are practically new, and I just gave them all to the thrift store. Now, with Combat Paper, you can take some of those camouflage utilities or maybe your dress uniform, and you can beat them down, which is really, I think, kind of cool. And you can beat them into paper, and then you can make them into something else, right? You might paint on it or write on it, do a haiku. Okay. So the last thing I just want to say is, as I consider this topic, I recognize how personal a journey this is for each person, family members included, and I'm mindful of who I share my journey with. I've only given you a little bit, as much as I could handle, but I'm happy to share with you, what I can in the question and answer session. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I don't need a mic. Air Force. Okay. Just fly right over. So, I'm probably the oldest person on the panel. I entered the Air Force in 1980. So I was a little girl from East New York, Brooklyn, traveled to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, and wind up being, after tech school, me and my sister actually joined on the same day and went to basic and tech school together. After being stationed in Abilene, Texas. She got California, I got Texas. Abilene, Texas in 1980 for a little girl from East New York, Brooklyn, in the Air Force. Logistics or inventory management. A strain on my cultural understanding of what was going on. In 1980, Abilene was a dry town, but still dry. I think maybe they crossed over in 81. No, I knew the first African American bank teller ever in that whole town. It wasn't a small town. Abilene Christian University is there, so it wasn't small, but certainly a little behind the times. So some of the cultural nuances was a stress. My entire 4 years active was spent at Dyess Air Force Base. Dyess was a military airlift wing, so we did travel quite a bit. However, I was stationed there and kind of subject to that culture. During my time in the military, I married and divorced. Had a lot of fun, learned a lot of things. I was saying to my colleagues earlier, oh, that's the O Club. So all of these folks were officers or in command, except almost, mostly, or in command. I left as a sergeant, and although I had some command that I had to take responsibility for, wasn't nearly what these folks had. When we talk about being a sergeant and wanting to be a part of the O Club, or be in command, taking leadership was not something that I ever shied away from. I moved forward. I had no area in taking a step forward, but not always faced with the comfort or embrace of the people that I was working with or attempting to lead. So a lot of resistance. But getting into the O Club was, you wanted to go to the commander's beer bus, right? No. And they laugh because they know that this happens. So weekly, alcohol provided, beer busts or events in the NCO and officers clubs. Having a culture of smoke them if you got them, relax, anything you need to take or do to decompress, because there was a lot of pressure being in the military. Was encouraged by everyone, especially women, to loosen us up. We were mostly around majority men, so 1 in 8 at Dyess Air Force Base. And then as an African American, a much, much smaller number at that base. So trying to get used to being in a leadership role or trying not to take over the colonel's role or be a captain, just be an NCO was a struggle. And I quashed that by, getting around using some hashish when we traveled or marijuana or other things that were encouraged. Of course, alcohol was included. And that led to me saying, you know what, I don't need the military. So I spent 4 years active, 2 years active reserve, and I got out. Cocaine was the thing in the mid-'80s. Everybody know? Okay, cocaine was the thing. So that took me down a rabbit hole, and I decided that, you know what, I'm not going to lose my family. So what I was going to, and this is why I kept looking at this, so I straddled the fence of paper and electronics, right? Because as an older person, I'm not, fully entrenched in this. Faith became something that was the catalyst for change for me. Family, my parents, both alive, thank God. My siblings, now my husband, my son and grandchildren at this time, were just something that I knew I had to recapture. Faith, family, and freedom. So addiction and difficulty in struggling with substances that could control or alter the course of your life was something that I did not want to live in or stay in. NYU Langone has a wonderful program here to help some of the people that I manage in my current life. So I said all that to say, when you think of military and addiction or mental health problems, right? Women, and MST was mentioned earlier, MST is a real thing, and I think the military finally, or the VA finally got to the point where they had to ask because so many women were not coming forward to talk about it. So let me ask you right off the top, has this happened to you? So that we can try to address it. Many women suffer from PTSD, not necessarily because they were at war or in a place, a theater of war. However, just being in a military culture with the type of pressure that is often put upon us to do our job, do it well, do it on time, and look good doing it in heels, just saying, was not always an easy thing to do. So you could have PTSD from the constant barrage of the sergeant, captain, colonel who just didn't know how to talk to you. The psychological trauma, right? The psychological abuse. TBI. Some people, some women in particular, could have had TBI, traumatic brain injury, before they even entered the military, and it was missed. It could have occurred jumping out of bed, because, in case you didn't know, you had 7 minutes from the time of reveille to the time you're fully dressed and outside. 7 minutes, ladies. 7 minutes. Not an easy thing to do. So you're jumping, running, hitting. You have to be fully buttoned, dressed, tied, gig line straight, hat on. And meanwhile, I'm remembering this from 1980. So just to give you a sense of how ingrained it becomes in your life, in your psyche, in your persona. In any case, TBI could have been present. When we talk about addictions, cocaine, heroin, now the opioid crisis, our veterans come out of the military wanting to decompress, not having a structure, not being organized in a way that helps them acclimate to civilian life. And although they have these yellow ribbon and debriefs and demobes and transition programs that they have, 1 week to help you acclimate to civilian life after having spent a year, 2 years, 20 years, is not nearly enough. And for women, first, if you're not used to picking out clothing, okay, like, call me, I'll take you on a spree. But I learned in a long time. But it's one of those things where you put on a uniform so you don't worry about what I need to buy to be casual chic this week, or to go to a business meeting or an interview, feeling comfortable in heels, if that's how you like to dress. Being responsive to communication, as we talked about. So this one calls you, but you don't know what to say and when to call back. Should you call back? Is it going to seem too... That anxiety is not taught. There's no manual. So being patient and trying to acclimate can become depressing, annoying, aggravating, make you want to beat your uniforms. Really? So when we think of how to help our veterans, first doing a clear and present assessment of that individual. Acknowledging that they are a veteran. Remember, this is all very new, that we're embracing and loving and celebrating our veterans. And I say very new, within the last maybe 10 years, it's been a wonderful thing, especially our Vietnam brethren. Please, are you kidding me? They were spit on, they were called names, they were hated. So for us now to say, we love you, we celebrate, what can we do to help you? We're learning as providers, and I thank God for organizations like NYU Langone and other providers who have partnered with the VA. Because for women, the VA, each VA center doesn't necessarily even have a gynecologist.
No.
Did you know that? They don't even have, how could you be a women's health service and you don't have a gynecologist? Really? So trying to bring us fully back into the fold, and saying at the same time, as VA, we're a provider that's going to serve your needs. Well, have you the resources to serve my needs? And if you don't, how do you channel that to make sure that we know it? Who are you sending our veterans to? Or where are you sending me? That's my question to them. So being clear that there are good, solid providers. They misspelled my name. So that there are helpful organizations, particularly around addiction and mental health. Samaritan Day Top Village has 100 beds for male and female veterans in Queens, Manhattan, and upstate New York. Our female veterans are in upstate New York program, in a program just for women. We found that gender-specific programming regarding, especially with veterans, helps to focus the energy, keeping the culture of the military intact while also abating and addressing the addiction and recovery. So, that's a little piece about my job. However, finding and cultivating resources for addiction, mental health, just deportment, managing finances. We got paid first and the 15th, and
On time.
if you're not used to if they're changing it now, well, this week, because Friday lands on the 16th, you don't get paid on the 15th, or you might get paid once a month in the military sometimes, and it's a solid, steady amount. Then you come out and it's very, very different. Might even be hourly. Might even be you might have to save money. Go figure. You might have to budget. We didn't have to budget. I didn't have to budget. I just lived. If I needed to eat, I could go to the chow hall. Food was available to you at any time. If I couldn't find a place to live, I could go and stay on base. No problem. It's very different now. We have so many homeless veterans, and they like to say that they've abated, I say they. The city likes to say we've abated homelessness for veterans or eradicated it. Well, they slowed it down, but it's still very much in existence. It's very difficult. And we still have to include and encourage that women, veterans, announce themselves as veterans. They acknowledge their veteran status, like the Colonel said. That it's like, okay, you get some of the things about me you can see. However, I have to tell you that I'm a veteran, and I have to be loud and proud about it, clearly defining it. So, working with women, serving women, I think that became, women and men in addiction, that became my clarity around purpose and around dedication. So in the military, I was dedicated to freedom and doing the work that I needed to do. Coming out after my own recovery, which would be 30 years this year, but well, thank you. Service to others to ensure that they have sort of the energy and lifestyle that I've had over these past 30 years has been my purpose. So I thank you. I appreciate all of you. And I left my card in case you or someone has an addiction problem. Not you, them. Not Simon. Someone has an addiction. Calls matter.
Oh, you were timing yourself. Good idea.
One question. Even before I ask my question, I want to say, I hear people say, thank you for your service all the time, and that is so not enough. I'm a very respectful person. That is not enough. When you started talking, I'm going to get emotional, so I don't know if I can answer the questions on here. What you all do, no one has a true understanding, and this is the first time I felt something like this, and my brother's been in the service, and you have given me a new perspective of how to help someone and how to acknowledge someone. So thank you is not enough for what you do, and I truly appreciate that you are here today and share this with us. And I will do more to make sure people understand and respect what you all have done in the service. So I can't ask the question. But thank you for opening my eyes and being so open with us. So I truly appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
I have a couple questions, but the first one is, both in the military and as a veteran, does it depend, your treatment in the military and your treatment as a veteran, what branch you were in? Like you spoke about stereotypes. They look different or up to you more if you were a Marine versus an Air Force?
Yes. I mean,
According to what branch you're in.
Like royalty and the Marines, and especially the Army, doesn't. So how does that go? And I do have one more question.
I mean, like, we joke around. Like, I think I called the Air Force Chair Force sometimes.
It's like the Air Force are less.
Yeah.
More of a business.
I think it's because we're the newest service. The Air Force tends to be a little bit more corporate in structure rather than traditional military from back in the 18th and 19th century. And I don't know that it's necessarily better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah.
So we tease each other.
Yeah.
I have a sister in the Army, father was in the Navy, but it's good in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Air Force is always better.
So the Air Force is called
Treat
money.
me, yes. Treatment wise, yes. Air Force definitely gets a lot more money.
They get more money. The Marine Corps, we get the hand-me-downs of everyone's stuff. And then, there's that hierarchy of intelligence. So, like, if you're super smart, you join the Air Force. If you're a rock licker like me, you join the Marines. But, it's all in good fun. We brag on each other a lot, but everyone here and everyone across the branches, everyone does their job, And when it comes time that we have to integrate in a time of war, we rely on one another to do their jobs. And when we do our job and when we do our job well, that's when we're successful. So that happens. We're just like kids.
Yeah, we fight.
Are
We
you
fight each other.
differently if you were a Marine versus an Air Force or an Army?
So I think culturally, everyone kind of, I want to say, identifies by our uniform outside, right? We all carry ourselves a different way because of that pride that we have in our branches. But everyone knows who dress blues, who wears them. So it's significant for us. Right? No, it's dress blues, man. We're one of the most recognizable uniforms, across the United States.
I'd like to add to that. Are the women wearing the chokers now?
The Leathernecks. So
That was a point of contention. I have a quick story.
Yeah, no, so I think, so the uniform board convened and we will be switching over.
Good.
So we will all be uniform.
Right.
In boot camp now, everyone wears the same blues.
That's good.
So there is no distinction between male and female, which I think is really important.
Sandy, is it okay if I jump in?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I was in Okinawa, and I was dead set on wearing slacks. And at that time, in 1996, women officers could only wear skirts. I can't walk in heels to save my life. I saw her run in heels just now, and my safety manager instincts, I was like, she's going to break her ankle, because I would break my ankle. So I wanted flats, and I wanted those royal blue slacks, and I wanted the blood stripe. So to say that I could not wear the blood stripe that Marines earned in the Battle of Tripoli is basically discriminating me against the fact that I'm a woman. And so I said, I went over to the exchange, I bought the slacks, I bought the closest size I could to my size. At that time, I really didn't have hips yet, thankfully. And I bought the red blood stripe, and I went over to the counter and I said, could you please put these on? And she was like, but that's not your uniform. Could you please put them on for my husband? And does it really matter? I'm going to buy these, and if I have to ask the next guy that walks in to do it, I will. And she finally just did it. Okay? I'll back up. We were at the basic school in Quantico, Virginia, and they wouldn't put the slit in my my blues blazer for the Sam Brown belt because it's not part of the women's uniform. I was like, put the slit in, or I'm going to do it myself, so that I can wear my sword and that I can march my Marines. So these things, we just kept pushing the limits on. There's about 11 of us that graduated from the Naval Academy. And the other thing I wanted to add is that we were not running 3 miles like the men. So when General Krulak came and talked to us, a lot of us graduated, and we were also on the track team. And we said, sir, we can do 3 miles. And at that time, I could do it in 19 minutes and 49 seconds. I was very proud of that. And it was with little hills too, and I could do the O course and the confidence course. So the whole thing's called the endurance course. It's like 7 miles over obstacles and such through terrain in 70 minutes. Just checking, and we'll see what you did. But the fact is that if you keep relegating people to a certain standard and you don't, encourage them to do pull-ups. So I don't even know how many pull-ups, we're doing now, but I sure as hell hope we are. And I heard from Anuradha Bhagwati that a colonel at 4th Battalion in Parris Island was reprimanded for encouraging 4th Battalion, which is the battalion of female recruits, to do the standard, which should be the Marine Corps standard, not the male standard versus the female standard, which should be 20 pull-ups, 3 miles, and try to get it as close to 21 minutes as you can. And what am I missing? 100 crunches.
120 now.
120. So the thing is yes, there's going to be a bell curve of performance, but there's going to be guys that are not going to do as well as girls, and they shouldn't be shamed for it, because they're going to be able to do something amazing that this other person can't do. And a woman, women versus men, we got to stop looking at it that way. So those are my 3 stories.
Does that answer your question?
Well, that's kind of an intro to my next question,
Okay.
which I'm reading a lot in the sports about transgender. mostly men to women competing in sports. I'm interested in this topic with the military. It seems like from the statistics, more men from the military are becoming women than women transiting to men. And I'm wondering, how is that going to be received by the existing women corps? And from what I read on it, there is an inequality there because even though it's accepted and paid for by, I guess, your benefits or whatever while you're active, can you be deployed while you're taking all these medicines? So in a way, you know, you may support your buddy next to you being transgender, but when it comes to combat, am I going to be deployed 10 times and you're not going because you're taking medicine? That to me is some kind of inequality. And my last comment is, following up this lady, do you appreciate it when a stranger finds out and says, thank you for your service? Does that mean anything to you? Because I say it all the time, and if it's offensive, then not enough.
Not offensive. It's not offensive.
So can we get back into transgender?
I think I was transitioning out after I actually was in when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed in 2013.
13?
No, it was before then. It was it was before 2013 because I was in AIT. It was 2011 that it was repealed. For me personally, I didn't care. Like, we had people, there were people you just knew who was a part of the LGBTQ community. And at least, I don't know, maybe because I'm a different era and I'm a different generation, I didn't care. At least the people I served with, we didn't care. Like, my biggest thing was, are you willing to shoot? Because my thing is, the reason, in reality, we are trained to go to war and to kill. That is, the true reality of what we do. And my biggest thing is, will you be able to defend me? That's what I care about, because we have to be able to defend each other, because I want to go home and I want to make sure you go home too. And is that your same mission? So to me, gender and all that stuff, I didn't care. I don't care, I know the Marines is a little different when it comes to it, because they do separate when it comes to training and stuff, but in the Army, we're pretty integrated, except for where we sleep. Our sleeping quarters are a little different. But I do know, in reality, there are people who don't deploy already, regardless. There are people who are HIV/AIDS positive that could not deploy. They're relooking that. So it's to shun people for being transgender, for not being able to deploy, I feel like it's not fair and it's not adequate, because there are people who can't deploy for various other reasons. And there are people who purposely have gotten pregnant right before deployment to not go. And so it's I don't feel like we should be singling out one group for their medical interventions that are preventing them from deploying, when there are people who have different medical problems that prevent them from deploying. That's my biggest thing.
That's a good point.
Can I offer to, so part of my career, I was actually also a personnel officer, so we actually did a lot of the policy work, not just with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but also with integrating transgender members into our community. And in the Air Force, I think it was a little bit smoother, just because we're the newest, we don't have the same traditions as some of the older services do. But my understanding is that the military does not pay for the medical piece of it, but you are correct that there are times that people can't deploy, and like Sydney said, there are a multitude of different diagnoses and different levels of ability to deploy, meaning there's deployment worldwide, which is you can go anywhere, and then there's another category where you can deploy to places where you're within proximity of a major medical installation. And then there's people who obviously can't leave the United States because of whatever issue that they have. So you're absolutely right, but I just wanted to clarify that the military does not pay for transition surgeries or medication. So if that helps. Break, the other half of your question, the thanking you for your service, I appreciate it. It's the same thing as when people say Happy Mother's Day. I don't have children, but I'm like, thank you, I will let my mother know. And it's the spirit of, but it's the spirit of what people want to share with you. And I appreciate the genuine place that people say that from. And so, you had said earlier, it's not enough. It is so, it means a lot to me that people take the time to say it. So thank you. I appreciate it.
I have a list.
Okay.
We have time for one more question. Anybody has a question? Anybody?
Deborah, was there one written down on that paper that you took?
Shh, there are other papers.
She's planting questions.
No, Pete.
So the role of being a servicewoman differed based on whether you served in healthcare areas or in non-healthcare units. Those in healthcare did not believe that they were treated differently because of being a woman. By contrast, servicewomen who served in non-healthcare units believed they were treated negatively because they were female. Would you agree with that statement?
I worked in multiple, because I was a medic, so I had a little bit more flexibility. I worked at the hospital, and the hospital in general is not the military. Like, if you work in a hospital, you're like a civilian in uniform, just because literally they don't operate the same, because it's a hospital setting, and working in a hospital is really different. They're more lax. Like, the officer enlisted thing doesn't matter as much because you're all working as a team. So that's something I noticed. So it's not as like rigid and like this is how the military functions. You function this way. So I think that's probably why, because in healthcare settings, naturally you have more women in there, and then also it's not as rigid. But I was not in a medical unit. I was in a battalion support, brigade support troop battalion. There we go. It's been a while. And so we had engineers, MP, so a couple other like MOSs that we all worked with. And I would say that is true, because like it was the whole like, oh, but your PT standard is different from mine, and so you don't, and like, because one thing I thought was crazy was that at the time I was scoring over 300 on the female scale, and then like 270, 280 on the male scale, and it blew my mind, because it was like, but does that really matter, because you're scoring a 230 on the male scale and I'm scoring higher than you. To me, it just, I don't know, like, it's true, it does happen. Healthcare in the military is really different. If you're stationed at a hospital, it's a little bit more relaxed, at least with my experience working in the ER. Most of the people were talking to each other by first name, which I thought was weird coming from a BSTB, because I was only there for 3 months. Because I was like, you're talking to your officer by first name? Talking by first name in the military is weird to me. I was like, you guys go by first name? I was like, wait a minute. I was like, what is going on? This is weird. So I feel like, but being in a hospital is just different, because they have to operate different. Like they are dealing with life and death. People are giving birth. Like, it shouldn't be as rigid military wise because of those things. But in regular units, it's like you're preparing to deploy all the time. That's your mission. At least in the Army, it's prepared to deploy. Pretend like you're getting ready to deploy, because deployments were just dying down when I was in. So like, at one point it was like you were constantly having to be prepared, because you may get orders to deploy in 24 hours. You need to be ready to leave. So I think that's the difference, is that naturally hospitals are a lot more lax than any other part of the military.
Thank you, speakers, for that eye-opening and informative dialogue. I must say that I am certainly much more educated now than I was a few minutes ago. And I appreciate your candor and continued contributions to our communities. We are honored to be in your presence, and thank you for your service to your country and to all who call the United States of America home. Before Mr. Markson shares his story and information with you, I would like to highlight the recent introduction of a new bipartisan bill hoping to tackle the problem of homeless women veterans. The Housing for Women Veterans Act, introduced by Mike Levin, a Democrat in California, and Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican, Pennsylvania, would allocate at least $20 million to groups aiming to help homeless women veterans. It also requires the Department of Veteran Affairs to analyze shortfalls in its homelessness programs, specifically with women veterans in mind, and submit a report to Congress within 9 months of the bill's passage. Both the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, and American Veterans, AMVETS, support the bill, according to Senator Levin's office. Senator Levin also stated, "Women service members and their families have sacrificed for our country, and we must do everything we can to prevent them from falling into homelessness when they return to civilian life." The bipartisan bill is a critical step that will help end homelessness amongst our nation's heroes and prioritize much-needed funding for women veterans and their families. Mr. Markson, please join me. Okay, and I'm going to just move this.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Do we stay here?
Go ahead.
Okay. Is that on the screen there? No. Sure. My name's Jim Markson, and I'm a United States Air Force veteran, a Vietnam veteran. I'm a lot older than a lot of people here. I got discharged in May of 1970. I left Vietnam in March of 1968. During the presentations by the other women veterans here, I picked up on just a couple of things that I'd like to talk to you about. First, Sydney, when you said that women are called caregivers, or so you must be the wife, or the you're not, or they even challenge your veteran status. Totally, the Veterans of Foreign Wars by congressional charter just changed 2 words in their charter. They replaced men with veterans, and they replaced widow to surviving spouses. So we're aware, the VFW and other organizations, they are aware of discrimination against women veterans. One of my purposes here is that I'm a member of I'm a life member, past post commander, VFW Post 107. Our post was mustered in 1919 by World War I veterans. We just had our 100th anniversary a couple of months ago. There's 15% of active duty personnel are women, 18% of women are in the Guard Reserves. So we've been in an organization, my post alone has been around for 100 years. You know how many women veterans we have? How many members we have? None. We did have one about 2 or 3 years ago. She was a Navy veteran. And she came to the post, and we swore her in. And I say she was she was younger, probably late 30s or something. To me, that's pretty young. And at the time, our senior vice commander was about the same age. So you've been in our post. And we have a canteen. So after the meeting, after the ceremony, sort of swearing in, the senior vice commander invited her to have a beer at the bar. Well, he had had a few beers before the meeting, and he threw up on her. We never saw her again. So that being said, we were talking about, let me see, Emily, I think it was. Emily, when you referred to benefits that veterans get from and there's all kinds of organizations, the Cohen organizations, the VFW, the DAV, you referred to them as free. Me, with my age or wisdom, whatever you want to call it, I change that to paid for. I find it is when people say, "Oh, it's free." No, it's not. It's paid for, and we earned it. So to say free, oh yeah, you joined the service to get the benefits. Well, wait a minute, I didn't know about the benefits when I joined. I was 19 years old. Oh yeah, you joined because of the benefits. I
stand corrected.
No, that's not correct. I just hate to hear that when they say, "Oh yeah, it's free." No, it's not. It's not free. And Deidre, there she is. It was saying about the Vietnam veterans when we came home about the transition, and I'm not a woman. I mean, I got out in I came back from Vietnam to Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn. And for some reason or other, they had made I still had 2 years to go in the Air Force. I enlisted for 4 years. So I finished Vietnam, and I was going to be stationed in Holland. I didn't know anything about Holland. That's where I was going to go after my leave. So I got 6 weeks leave, and I'm in Brooklyn. After 3 weeks, because of all the harassment of you were in Vietnam, you joined, you volunteered, I cut my leave short, and I was so glad that I had another country to go to, because the humiliation and the just anger against the veteran, and I was not expecting that. My father, not my grandfather, my father was a World War I veteran. He was born in 1901, and I was born in 1947. So you do the math. All my uncles were in World War II. And they came home, the ones that came home, 2 of them didn't come home. I never got to meet them. But they came home, they were John Waynes. I mean, they walked tall, and they were proud. And when I came home, they said, you in Vietnam? Why didn't you go to Canada? Why didn't you get married? Why didn't you get married? Why didn't you go to Sweden? What, are you stupid? So it gets to the point where if somebody said to me, they didn't really know me, say, Jimmy, are you in Vietnam? I'd say no. And that killed me that I had to say that. Anyway, back to trying to get women back into to join a veterans organization. Let me ask a question. Anybody belong to American Legion or the VFW? Oh, really? That's great. That's great. It took me 30 years. I got out in 1970, and I didn't have anything to do with a veterans organization until about 2000. Until about 2000. And I regret it. And now I became a member of the Veterans VFW 107 about 10 years ago, and I really regret it. So that's why I'm here. Women should join any veterans organization, if not just for the magazine. Every month, you don't have to go to the Post and drink beer, just for the magazine. Because every month they come out with articles about the burn pits, about things that are health issues that are affecting veterans. And the VA is not going to come knocking on your door and say, excuse me, were you in Iraq when they had the burn pits? No. You're going to have to go there, and you're going to have to apply for benefits that you're entitled to. And the VA, the VFW, American Legion, all of those organizations will help you out. The women veteran homelessness is the fastest growing segment of homelessness in the veteran population today. A lot of times, these women veterans have children, and they don't ask for help, because when they were in the service, they were instilled with a sense of pride, self-reliance that's taught you to be in the military. During one of my surgeries, I had the anesthesiologist saying, oh, you were a veteran? I said, yeah, I'm a veteran. He says, I was an anesthesiologist at the Brooklyn VA. It was the best job I ever had. Veterans don't complain about anything. He said, but they didn't pay enough, so I left. As far as being homeless, male homelessness, women homelessness, the Veterans of Foreign Wars has what they call the VFW National Home for Children. It was formed in 1925. It's in Eaton Rapids, Michigan. It's open to active duty military, veterans, and relatives of VFW members. This home for children, where am I here? Yeah, they'll put up families for up to 4 years with no utility bills and no rent bills. And they'll take care of these people. If it's a surviving spouse, I almost said widow, if it's a surviving spouse of someone who gets killed in Afghanistan today, they'll take care of the family. It took me 30 years, I don't know if I'm repeating myself, but it took me 30 years before I ever set foot in the Brooklyn VA. I just didn't want anything to do with it. And it took 38 years after I left Vietnam before I was diagnosed with PTSD. That's a long time that I didn't know why certain things did certain things, why I acted a certain way. 38 years. Don't let that happen to you or any veterans. I just try my best to get veterans, especially the younger guys. And I can't talk. I had nothing to do with veterans organizations for 30 years. But when I see somebody coming home from Afghanistan or guys that came home from Iraq, we try to grab them and take them under our wing and bring them into the veterans organizations. But they're hard to keep, these young guys. They'll join the post for a year or so, and then they just don't come around anymore. That's about all I have. If anybody has any questions for me, I mean, I've been been a veteran since 1970, and the Vietnam veterans, we weathered a lot of storms, a lot of criticisms, a lot of anger. I mean, for the first time in history, the soldiers were blamed. It was an unpopular war, and for the first time in history, we were blamed for it when we came home. And excuse me?
I'm not stuck with you anymore.
Okay. All right,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody have any further questions for our speakers that you might want to throw out there before we wrap up today? Yes.
Not a question, but I really just wanted to thank everyone for coming and speaking, because as much as I work in recruitment for NYU, and I'm involved with the recruiting and retaining initiative for veterans. And as much as when you transition from the military to civilian world, it's very foreign to you. For civilians, the military is very foreign to us until people like yourselves are generous with their time and emotions and personal stories. And the more we learn, the easier it is for us to be a resource and understand and help. And I think that what people don't know about, they're afraid of, and they shy away. And the more you know, the more you can help. So thank you very, very much for sharing with us.
Thank
Sorry
you.
that was that.
No. I just wanted to quickly, I know this was playing in the background of the others, the presentation, and we did touch on this briefly about MST, military sexual trauma. And yes, based on what Deidre said, there were female veterans that went through military sexual trauma that were not allowed to claim that it was PTSD. And I am just shocked that was even a situation. And it was only until Ruth Moore, and I want to really share with you the date as when this actually went into effect, that a woman who has gone through sexual trauma in the military was able to use PTSD. They were not allowed to get benefits, anything like that, just because they went through this and it was not considered, the VA did not consider it, it didn't fall under PTSD, which is just shocking.
Not only
So-
that, they did not acknowledge that there was no proof for the crime. So if you accuse someone just by saying it, they,
There wasn't
well,
enough.
how could you prove it? How do we believe that? You could be making that up. So, especially women who are made to feel like I shouldn't say anything because they're not going to believe me anyway, and they're not going to do anything about it. So with Ruth Moore, they were able to acknowledge your claim just because you made it.
Yep.
So that was an important step.
And if you look at the last sentence.
Can I add something really fast? Something that I have been a true advocate for is that when we talk about MST, it's always from a female service member's perspective. When I was deployed in Afghanistan, a male veteran was actually raped. And so those claim numbers are actually really low, and it actually happens at a higher rate than people want to acknowledge. Because we have to acknowledge the military is predominantly male. So we don't talk about that either. And something making it where it's almost only female veterans who experience this, it's kind of a disservice to the other
That's right.
service members who experience this sexual trauma.
That's right, thank you. Thank you, Sid.
Yeah, it's under, yeah.
Because they don't want to.
They're ashamed, they're more ashamed than. So, I just wanted to bring attention to the fact that it took her decades to actually get approved for this. So can you imagine that you have PTSD and you're fighting this and you're going through this type of, you experience this trauma and you're not being acknowledged for suffering from it, and just because you're a woman and there's no proof. So we're coming along nicely and things are moving along, but as somebody said, we're not there yet, but we're still making our way. And so at this time, thank you, Mr. Martin. Thank you, speakers. That concludes our session for today. If you missed any parts of this amazing conversation, we do have the live stream that will be available. Is it available right now? tomorrow. That will be available, and we will put it up on the Veteran Employees Resource Group community page on the portal. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, speakers. I really appreciate it. It was a great session, and have a lovely rest of your afternoon.